our first. Awesome. Can someone please turn off the
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our first agenda item, which is the future of regional housing and supportive housing service measure. Today's work session is dedicated solely to identifying our shared priorities as council to improve oversight, accountability, and the impact of regional affordable housing and supportive housing services investment. Today, we will start out with our COO, Marisa Madrigal, our Chief Operating Officer, to recap for us the stakeholder engagement on this topic that took place over the first 6 months of this year, as well as the key themes that emerged from that feedback. And then I will kind of bring you up to speed on where we are. So great, thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson. I believe we've got some slides. Okay, great. So Council President Peterson, councilors, in January, you directed me to undertake a multi-pronged process of stakeholder and community engagement, research and analysis regarding the future of regional funding to address our persistent regional housing and homelessness crisis. As you know, this crisis has many causes. An essential lack of housing supply dating back to the Great Recession, made worse by the pandemic for all incomes, especially those with very little to no income. The health and economic challenges exacerbated by the pandemic, wages that keep falling behind inflation, a long-running history of racial and economic inequality, and a generational decline in federal funding to address healthcare and homelessness. And as you also know, we are not standing idly by to watch this unfold. We're taking action with the support of voters and the partnership of many allies. We're delivering about 20% more units than promised on the Metro Housing Bond. And despite challenges out the gate, Supportive Housing Services is providing key supports and housing placements to thousands of people, while preventing thousands more from finding themselves experiencing the traumas of homelessness. Next slide, please. And we know that there's much more to do. This is a crisis that affects everyone, some deeply personally, and all of us through the effects it has on community livability, recovery, and opportunity. This reality unfolds as a gap looms in affordable housing funding as the Metro and Portland bonds successfully wrap up their investments. That's why stakeholders asked us for this exploration and why you directed me to begin it publicly. You told staff to prioritize urgency, stability of existing programs, pragmatism, equity, and transparency in creating the process and developing the recommendation I delivered in July. For 6 months, as you know, we talked to a great many people over a great many hours, from the 24 who met for long meetings at the stakeholder advisory table to scores who participated in community discussions led by the Coalition of Communities of Color, and the many subject matter experts who engaged with our housing department, the input of our oversight committees, CORE and MPAC, and the many direct engagements we held with county, city, and coalition partners. As you know, we didn't seek consensus in the development of my recommendation. We sought to capture the full range of opinions of people with experience and knowledge of the challenge, its impacts, and its solutions. Next slide. Yet, as I told you in July, there were more areas where we found broad agreement than we found divergence. A broad majority of stakeholders, community members, and voters in the region support continued investment in homeless services and affordable housing. In the environment we find ourselves in, they prefer expanding supportive housing services investments instead of establishing a new property tax to allow the creation of deeply affordable housing, that is, housing for those experiencing or at greatest risk of homelessness. A broad majority believe the SHS tax sunset in 2030 should be significantly extended to create longer-term certainty for communities and providers. But this needs to come with changes to oversight and governance. More on that in a second. And some stakeholders and voters also support changes to the SHS taxes as part of this package, including a modest rate cut to the SHS personal income tax to address the reality that revenues are far higher than anticipated, so long as program outcomes can still be achieved. And then they also support adjusting the SHS personal income tax thresholds for inflation so that the tax continues to be applied to high income earners over time. Next slide. I'm confident that the support exists in the community and on this council for extending the SHS sunset and increasing its flexibility to create housing as well as fund services. Critically, however, we have heard very clearly from a broad majority of stakeholders and in public opinion research that these changes are contingent on improving the regional oversight, transparency, and accountability of regional investments in housing and services. Simply put, to do more with the tools that we have, we must do better with them and build confidence that we know how. While we heard many areas of feedback related to oversight and accountability, I believe we can sum it up in several major categories. These include better outcomes. This means a clear overall vision of what we're trying to achieve, the metrics that help us track the impacts of what we're doing, and how we understand and address the inputs that are making the job harder. Better experiences for providers and recipients. Homelessness and housing shortages are regional issues that don't stop at city and county lines. That is why voters created a regional program. Although there needs to be room for local expertise and flexibility, wherever a provider is working in the region and whatever city or county a person struggling finds themselves in, they need more consistent regional practices and expectations. Clearer roles and authority. We have a program built on an optimistic idea that the benefits of investments will be obvious and that there will not be any disagreements between Metro, our county implementation partners, and other stakeholders. We don't currently have workable mechanisms for enforcement of regional standards, tracking regional outcomes, or making corrections when needed. To achieve better outcomes and experiences, we've heard we need to be more realistic, that it's okay to have different ideas and it's expected that we'll learn along the way, but we need to be able to fix what isn't working. And we need to know, oh, thank you, who's responsible for doing so. And then lastly, more efficiency overall. Instead of clear authorities, we currently have overlapping roles and committees, convoluted processes of budgeting and reporting, all of which hold us back from efficient decision-making and focusing resources on what works. So with that background, I hand it back to you, President Peterson, just as you're about to sneeze, but pardon me.
What great timing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate all the work that not only our staff have done, but the stakeholders and a lot of people who are here today listening, and just trying to get us to this point of recognizing where we have gaps and where we need to go. And so I just want to say thank you. The lessons that we have carried forward from the last 6 years of implementing the Metro Bond and 4 years of building up the SHS are all coming home to us to figure out how to kind of reset and create a learning environment, a learning culture for this measure. You'll recall that we received the recommendation from the COO on July 9th. We had a couple of work sessions to discuss its implications before our August recess. In those work sessions, I heard your appreciation of the recommendations and your eagerness for momentum, which I share. I heard your desire to keep doing our part to create housing and address homelessness in our communities. And I also heard your concerns about the current structure and the challenges we faced amid a problem that continues to grow. I want to call your attention to the fact of just how much the magnitude of this problem has increased between the point in time counts just before we referred the SHS measure in 2020, the counts that informed our goals for population A and B to be served, and sizing of the measure, the counts in 2023, unsheltered homelessness in the region grew threefold. So let me just put the numbers to that. In 2020, it was 2,500, and in 2023, it was 7,500 unsheltered homeless in this region. That's not the total of homelessness. That is just the unsheltered. So yet, I've been calling that the pandemic bump. And we have county folks and providers and advocates who have felt the depth of this problem, and are obviously wanting a reset, but wanting us to do it in a way that recognizes that there has been good work going on at the counties. And without this measure, we would have a worse problem than we already do. So I think we do need to recognize that. But we also need to recognize that the inflow has been much greater than the outflow. And we do not have as much authority over the inflow as we do over the outflow. And so what we need to talk about as a council is how we bring the region together to deal with both. And I think that's important because we have an urban growth boundary expansion discussion coming up. We have a housing needs analysis that we are responsible for, and the cities have and counties have the responsibility for housing production numbers. So trying to think about how to marry these up and accelerate our work to being able to have housing for everyone, especially middle income and below. We also have to think about prevention. In the last year alone, more than 15,000 eviction cases have been filed in the Portland region. So there's little question we need to keep going and keep improving. And there's also little question that our current system isn't set up well to handle all of this. As Marisa said, if we're going to ask voters permission to do more and have longer time with the tools and taxes we have, we need to demonstrate how we're going to use them wisely and accountability well into the future. I believe this council agrees, as Marisa just stated, about the desirability of extending the SHS sunset and allowing housing as a use for those taxes. If not, let me know. This would be the time to have that conversation. But I think we all recognize that it's impossible to get there without meaningful improvements to the governance and oversight, which is why we're here talking today. So my hope is that by agreeing on those major problems that we all want to solve together and why they matter, we can create a clear statement about where we intend to go for ourselves and for our partners and everyone who lives and works in this region. As we discussed in those summer work sessions, the COO recommendation kicked off a new phase of this conversation. This phase is led by us as council. It's a conversation directly focused on what's realistic, viable, and ideally supportable by as many parties as possible. To that end, I have taken your concerns and what we've heard from stakeholders into direct conversations with the county chairs, several mayors, and key stakeholders in the housing and homelessness advocacy and business community. In these conversations over the last 6 weeks or so, we've explored how to find agreement and build coalitions to make the changes we need. Without going into too much detail, I'll say these conversations have been frank, and I've heard frustrations and I've shared frustrations. Everyone wants what's best or what they think is best. And even in a system that nearly everyone agrees is not performing at its best, any change is potentially intimidating. It's critical we listen to the partners and stakeholders. It's also critical that we hold to our values and obligations to the region's voters and communities. To that end, I just want to say publicly, things I've been talking about with different groups, especially after hearing stories, whether it's staff from around the region or whether it's folks who have participated touched any part of this measure. This measure was set up in an emergency situation. It did not define roles and responsibilities, nor did it define what success would look like. And that has been carried out as best as it can on the ground. It's time to start defining some of those things because it has traumatized this entire community because we don't know what success looks like and we can't talk about it in a way that celebrates it in the way that we should going forward. So I just want to say to all the staff in the room and to all the advocates and everybody who has touched this, this has not been an easy time. And it is a responsibility for all of us to make sure that we can clearly define roles and responsibilities and what success looks like, because people on the ground deserve that from us, who literally need help moving into permanent supportive housing at some point. So I just wanted to get that out because I think it's important to acknowledge that people are coming from a place where they really want change, but the change is going to be hard because we really do need to start talking about how to celebrate success. Through these conversations, I've affirmed agreement among key parties about many of the key issues that need to be addressed. I've also recognized that it may not be possible to come up with a single proposal that everyone supports. For instance, we've heard key stakeholders and potential allies call for relief and refocus of the SHS personal income taxes. For some, that's reducing the tax rate. For others, it's indexing the threshold. And for some, it's both. I believe council remains interested in these ideas, albeit with caution about their impact on revenues and need. I think we are all wanting to see whether key stakeholders can agree on a shared approach, but today our focus is on governance. And we started this conversation last time, and I just want to kind of follow through and complete it. So let's turn to where we stand right now with SHS and the bond. Our partners have shared some good news about program impacts in recent weeks. And again, we should recognize and celebrate that. Just last Thursday, we heard from our housing department about the incredible progress that our county partners have been making in the supportive housing services work during the Q4 report. And this month, Dr. Darrell Milner Building opened in North Portland with affordable housing bond funding, bringing 63 new affordable housing units to our region. But amid these bits of good news are undercurrents of how much more we could do. There's carryover funding that has gone unspent. There are regional outcomes that are still unclear, and there are regional realities and inputs to homelessness that are still unaddressed. There are also regional partners like our city partners that are underutilized, if not outright neglected, in their ineligibility for direct funding. And as we've heard from stakeholders, there's no way in the current system to realistically address these problems. That's why I want to focus today's conversation on what we're trying to fix in governance, what we want to improve, why we think it matters, and how we'll know if we've succeeded. Council has a duty to listen, and ultimately, whether or not we can achieve full consensus, we have a duty to lead. That's what I believe voters and the community want from us, and I'm confident that's what the council intends to do. So next slide. Diving into the key areas of needed improvement, we'll start with clear outcomes. There are four main governance issues that stakeholders have highlighted. With each one of these, I'll review a high-level summary of what we've heard. The COO's Regional Housing Stakeholder Advisory Table and coalition partners, including Coalition of Communities of Color, Welcome Home, Here Together, Portland Metro Chamber, Smart Growth Oregon, have all expressed the need for a clear regional vision in which specific outcomes and metrics can measure progress towards. We see this trend in public opinion research as well. I guess I also want to say, just talking to folks who have been trying to implement the program on the ground, the number one thing that they asked for was a North Star. I have racked my brains for the last 3 weekends trying to figure out how to characterize a North Star, because we could just talk about values. And actually the Regional Oversight Committee has some really good lists of things that talk about values. And I think that's part of a North Star. But I think the providers and the public are asking for something much more specific. But if you get into too specific, then you're actually dictating budgets. And so between those two ends of the spectrum, we have to find something in the middle that really provides a regional, not just vision, but flexible North Star that says what our expectations are. And I guess that's the only way that I can really articulate that, is that we need to say, if you're homeless, this is what you should expect. If you are a provider, this is what you should expect. If you're a city in this region, this is what you should expect. If you're the Metro Council overseeing a program, this is what you should expect. I think we need to be able to articulate what those expectations are so it's clearer. So I just put a pin in that and just ask you to think about what that could look like, because it is not easy, and it's probably the single most important thing that we could do is articulate our expectations of how these different things look. The 2024 Metro SHS audit identified a lack of reliability in the current system, performance data, and due to several factors, including inconsistent definitions, goals, and performance measures. The Regional Housing Stakeholder Advisory Table members also expressed confusion and distrust in their ability to easily compare progress towards goals across the Tri-County area. All three county partners are supportive of key performance metrics, but want to be part of the process to develop them, and Washington County has started working on their key performance metrics, but we don't have regional performance metrics. Finally, public opinion research polling indicates historically low trust in government that needs to be addressed as part of any reforms we propose. And feedback from the stakeholder advisory table and coalition partners, as well as numerous media articles, reflect concern that the SHS revenue is not working towards demonstrable change in the region, and that there is a lack of clarity about what outcomes the dollars are working toward. Somebody would like to have a say off council. That's why I want to focus today's conversation, what we're trying to, and stakeholders have suggested that improvements include standardized regional performance metrics, meaningful reporting requirements, and greater transparency for the public. And again, as one provider asked for a North Star. It's been said that our current SHS approach makes us plan and decide through looking in the rearview mirror instead of observing where we're at, let alone anticipating and navigating the twists and turns of the road ahead. So how do we flip that script so that that conversation happens up front, expectations are clearly defined, and budgeting then happens afterwards, not review of what happened in a passive way. Moreover, working through the 3 counties is like we're trying to navigate 3 roads at the same time instead of having a single strategy for the region. Next. We've also heard that we need better experiences for providers, partners, and recipients. While change is necessary, it must be done in a way that does not disrupt the progress, because harm current service levels or conflict with the values in which this measure was born from. As reflected in the Metro COO's regional housing funding recommendation, the Regional Housing Stakeholder Advisory Table reflected a clear and aligned interest in ensuring changes to governance should reflect a commitment to racial equity, including elevating how the voices of those most impacted are incorporated into decision-making. And many stakeholders also expressed the need to capture barriers that direct service providers face today, including contract and procurement challenges and other inconsistently managed processes across the tri-counties. We've heard from providers that the current system has made reimbursements difficult and that resources may not be reaching the people they need. But stakeholders have argued that change needs to come without impacting how we reflect our values, including who is served. And while the majority of stakeholders demand change, they want to ensure affordable housing and homelessness service remain focused on the populations with the highest needs, including the chronically homeless and those at greatest risk of chronic homelessness. To that end, coalition partners continue to express the importance of including community members in policymaking, and that individuals with lived experience provide critical insight and need to be robustly represented in stakeholder conversations. Lastly, this moment in time provides an opportunity to address city feedback and concerns. The Metropolitan Mayors Consortium has voiced concerns about lack of access to dollars and an inability to influence how dollars are prioritized for specific city needs. Additionally, several mayors participated in the Regional Housing Stakeholder Advisory Table and urged Metro to consider how cities' needs can be more effectively incorporated into county investment needs. Next. Stronger accountability. We've heard from a variety of stakeholders about the need for stronger accountability to be incorporated into governance changes. It's widely known that the SHS has many players, elected officials and community members, providers, agencies, sitting on committees, reviewing plans, and writing reports. Yet no one party can direct resources where they are most effective, let alone correct things that need to be corrected. Council and many stakeholders state clearly that this is a regional program meant to address a regional problem and should be governed like one. Yet the structure we have now built is built on an optimistic but unpragmatic idea of co-collaboration and continual agreement. The assumed co-collaborative nature of IGAs has resulted in delayed decision-making and inefficient use of resources. As examples, after nearly 3 years, a data sharing agreement has yet to be signed between the parties. I believe we are close, even though the IGAs place responsibility with Metro to establish a regional homeless data collection and reporting program. The Multnomah County Corrective Action Plan took 4 months to negotiate and still lacked clearly defined outcomes. Now, I want to be clear also in all of this that while there's a lot of money flowing into the system and the counties were building up programs, there was a lot of pressure on the counties to spend money as fast as possible. And so the counties at this point have set up systems to spend money as fast as possible and feel like that is part of their key performance metrics at this point, which we need to recognize. We are part of that problem, and we need to all start to talk about how do we actually get to key performance metrics for outcomes on the ground, outcome-based decision-making, so that we can actually align the outcomes with the budgeting in the future. They've built the programs up. Now we need to actually figure out what's working and what's not working and have a conversation about that. So it's not, we don't want to be in the point where we're doing corrective action plans. We want to be at the point where we're actually creating a learning environment, right? Not corrective action plans. The lack of clearly defined responsibilities, limited mechanisms to hold parties accountable to those responsible, and the inability to direct particular action if a party is off course are the most criticized elements of this program. Stakeholders support clear roles with explicit accountability and levers to direct action when any party, counties or metro, are not fulfilling their responsibilities. While they support a single oversight body that reports to Metro Council to develop regional strategies and performance metrics, they do not want the regional process underway to be disregarded and needs to be included, especially as part of a transition. We've heard this feedback about lack of teeth from the SHS Oversight Committee, and it's also been identified in the auditor's report. That theme is reinforced in opinion research as well, as enhanced oversight is critical. Lastly, I believe, nope, 2 more to go, sorry, greater efficiency. This program has given us incredible, unprecedented resources, more than any other region in the country per capita. And it's also meant we've had to build completely new systems from scratch, as I said, in some parts of the region, while simultaneously trying to push round pegs through square holes of existing systems and others. As a result, we've got an overall sensation of being plodding, inefficient, tied in knots. This has been exacerbated by unexpected revenue collections, unused carryover, and unclear expectations for spending. I do want to be clear that the counties would have a problem with us saying unused carryover because they are budgeting it into the future. We just haven't had a conversation about how that gets us to the outcomes on the ground. Once again, the 2024 Metro Auditor's Report also validated another key theme that we've heard from stakeholders about the need to establish a streamlined decision-making that matches the urgency of the need. The current model, which includes multiple layers of oversight, is inefficient, and stakeholders have urged streamlining the governance structure to increase efficiencies. For example, county budgets have already been adopted by the time county work plans are submitted to Metro Council for quote approval. The slow, prolonged process has been criticized by coalition partners and media publications. Findings from the 2024 Metro SHS audit emphasized the need for a more streamlined and transparent governance framework to ensure better accountability and more effective oversight. The Regional Housing Stakeholder Advisory Table largely agreed that collaboration and accountability must be matched for effective governance. And that to build off the work we've already done on the targets. Is that right? No, sorry guys. The current collaborative co-creation processes outlined in the SHS in intergovernmental agreements have resulted in inefficient and prolonged decision-making, which contradicts the urgency at hand, hinders progress, and sets the stage for interjurisdictional conflict we have seen all the way along. All right. Finally, onto what's needed in a governance model, and then we're almost to the point where we can have a conversation. But I wanted to get all of that out and literally on the table. So what's needed in a governance model? Before we move into a discussion, I'd like to share some of my thinking around governance. And we've talked about the fact that there was not well-defined roles and responsibilities in the ballot measure itself when it was created, nor the definition of success. So it's clear that there are multiple ways that we can navigate governance to improve on each of these themes. But in my conversations over the last 6 weeks, and based on feedback we've heard over the last 9 months and beyond, I believe there are a few key elements that any future governance model must include. First, everyone involved in this work, from Metro to the counties, from the service providers to the business community, needs to be working toward a shared vision. We do need that North Star to drive our work and align all of our strategies and plans. The 2020 measure set out goals based on available data at the time, and as I said earlier, the landscape has changed significantly. Metro needs to step up as a leader in this moment and update the vision for this work to respond to current urgent needs and to bring all parties together. We got this work started with our strategic targets conversation as a council in the area of housing last year, developing a high-level vision for the region that aimed to integrate homelessness service needs and housing production needs. I propose that we build off that great work we've already done on the targets and work to refine it for use as a North Star. I also think to have a more efficient system, we need to consolidate from two committees, the SHS oversight and the Tri-County Planning Body, to one committee that provides oversight and policy direction. I have started referring to it as H2PAC, Housing and Homelessness Policy Advisory Committee. This committee must be charged with looking at the crisis of insufficient housing and rising homelessness holistically by considering the production of housing as well as ways to address and prevent homelessness. The new committee needs to build a truly regional system with consistent standards and definitions across city and county lines, building on the work to date from the SHS oversight and the Tri-County Planning Body. The committee should be responsible for developing a regional housing and homelessness action plan, not a vision plan, but an action plan that is based on regional strategies, outcome-based goals, and has key performance metrics to help support better outcomes, tracking, and accountability. I would like to see that include housing needs analysis and production strategies, as well as supportive housing service implementation, homelessness prevention strategies, and the integration of affordable housing development acquisition into the SHS program. I also want to change the way we currently review and approve work plans and allocate funding out to jurisdictional partners for SHS. I believe that we could all be better served by reviewing plans in advance of funding allocation, rather than the current system where we look back at the strategy that was already implemented with a 12-month delay to correct any issues. Launching a new committee is important to reset our practices and systems, and I believe this is the best time to consider transitioning to forward-looking strategy led by a new committee. And it's imperative that this committee have Metro counselors on it and report up to the Metro Council, because ultimately we referred this measure and are accountable to the voters and the region for its success. I would like to see the committee made up of elected officials and community members from across the region, representing expertise in homeless services, housing policy, data analysis, home building, economic development, and behavioral health, to name a few. And lastly, I'm interested in finding ways to work with the cities in a different capacity than we previously have on the supportive housing service measure. They are critical partners who are on the front lines with people experiencing homelessness. And I believe we have an opportunity to explore the feasibility of a city program that could fund some of their needs, which are different from the counties. So with that, we'll move into questions and have a conversation. Council, there are a couple questions that I would love to have your reflections on, thinking back over the last 9 months and what we've heard today and in the past. What reflections do you have on these critical areas that need solving for? What is the highest priority to solve for? What characteristics are the most important of anything going forward, and what should Metro Council's role be? So that just kind of opens it up for conversation. I'm pretty sure every single one of you have some opinion, comment, and suggestions. So do we want to just go around the room? And shall we start with those online? Because I know Councilor Lewis might have a time limited if she hasn't already had to leave. Because she already had to leave.
No, I'm still here.
Oh, good. Councilor Lewis, go ahead.
Yeah, and my apologies. I had a medical appointment that got shifted. So I am around until I need to leave for that. But I think this discussion is really good. I thank you for bringing kind of your current level of conversation to us. We're all being approached not only by stakeholders and providers, but as you mentioned, local government folks as well. So in terms of your reflection that the current kind of spend down goals are the most important goals because of how everything was slow to start. I'm absolutely in alignment that actually getting a plan needs to be service delivery goals and results, and not how we're spending money. So I really appreciate that each of the 3 counties currently is operating with their local implementation plan. Some of those plans are manageable and 30 to 40 pages. At least one of them was well over 100 pages. Those plans right now are constructed in such a way, one, where they don't knit together either with each other or with our regional program. And 2, they operate a little bit more like a menu. And as long as the expenditure that's being reimbursed is on that menu, it's fine for SHS use. But I feel like it's not actually identifying which strategies are working or which strategies are primary. And that would be my expectation, is that we move into not just which services are reimbursable, but which strategies are you prioritizing over others for which populations and exactly when and how. I don't think I can put that into exactly a North Star, other than that the strategies have to point to the North Star. When I think about how homelessness looks and feels different in different parts of the region, I think we've done a nice job of letting counties work with providers that know what works. Then we have the problem of many of our providers provide services in multiple counties and are super tripped up when they're providing the exact same service, but it gets reimbursed or the accounting gets sideways one county versus another. One very granular example of that is we know and have used in this region mobile service delivery for a long time. It's quite unreasonable to ask somebody to get someplace if they don't have a house, if they don't have a car. Why not provide services to them where they are? In order to get your caseworker to that person, you need a vehicle. And we have one county that says that paying for that vehicle is reimbursable, and yet we have another county that says, no, it's not reimbursable. So then you have a problem of, is the mobile service actually getting delivered to people where they need it, because of an accounting question. I would really like for us to have some standards, some guidelines. I do not want Metro to be deciding which service providers deliver what kind of services, but some more guardrails around where there's some program design questions that can be unified, I think would be really nice. Hopefully that got to, the screen went away from me. So I think I talked about all 3 bullet points. I don't know if I did.
Awesome. Thank you. Much appreciated. We have any other counselors online? No. All right. Why don't we start with Counselor Nolan?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Few things. When we're thinking about governance structure and the individuals, the humans who will do that oversight, I think we ought to be true to representing the region, and particularly in issues around housing and housing affordability and recovering from or avoiding homelessness. We ought to recognize that 43% of the people who live in this region rent their home. And we should make sure that 43% of the people who are overseeing the success of this program and the direction of the program should also be renters or something close to that. Because if we have only people who have bought their homes 25 years ago, they may academically understand today's conditions, but they don't understand them in a visceral way that I think is important for guiding or directing this program. generally, I think we also ought to be really clear about our expectations as the Metro Council, that the governing body should live up to our policy of racial equity. And while we have to determine how people are appointed, we should be clear with our partners that this is a deep value of ours, and we look to them to help us achieve it in the people they nominate or appoint to the committee. I have other thoughts, but I'll wait and see what others say.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Rosenthal?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, nobody ever said this was going to be easy. And I was not around at the discussions when we did the housing bond. I was around some of the discussions when we transitioned and made for the SHS. Nobody said it was going to be easy, and we didn't really have a model because there was no model. We are sort of creating it as we go along, and we are learning as we go along. So flexibility going forward is one of the key things. Now, I do want to say you covered a lot of things in your remarks, and I have a general agreement with what you said, but I can't reflect on it because I haven't had a chance to read all the nuances of things you read. So that I'm not going to comment on that at this point. I do think we need to play on our successes. I think we're very fortunate that we do have the potential for a structure here. I was talking to some people on the South Coast, and they have housing problems, but they don't have any mechanism to even start to address it. We are somewhat beneficial. My question would be, are there people, and since I haven't talked to everybody in the district, are there people who don't think we need a regional approach? Are there people who think that that is the wrong way to go? I would disagree with them, but I'm just wondering if we have that. And regarding a North Star, I think we do have my personal view is we have a North Star. I have a North Star. It's to reduce chronic homelessness to the bare minimum. There are some people that do not want to be homed. And then to prevent people at risk from becoming homeless through, either disasters or personal exigencies or whatever. To me, that's the North Star. And I think from all the people I've talked to, everybody seems to agree on that. Now, that needs elaboration, I think, as you pointed out. So where we go from here I think the main thing, and particularly on this committee, on the setting up a regional governing body, there is no perfect way to set it up. There's no perfect representation on there that's going to represent all the aspects. So flexibility is going to be necessary. We're going to need a way to modify it if we find out that it's not serving the needs or it's not addressing some of the questions. Maybe we won't have enough people that are dealing with metrics. And so we want to add somebody who can really deal with metrics from other perspectives. I don't know exactly how that's going to roll out, but flexibility is something we're going to have to do, and we're going to have to interpret community and stakeholders more broadly. And the one area that I think we probably haven't listened to enough is probably the people who are actually out in the field providing the services. And we need to have a more formal way for having them to have input into this committee, even if they're not going to be governing the committee or making the decisions. So I have submitted extensive comments and suggestions in my view on both the potential for a bond issue or for a ballot measure, as well as on the structure of the committee to staff. And I don't want to go over it in detail. That would be redundant at this point.
Thank you. Counselor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of things you mentioned today that came up for me and really the constituents of District 1, and that's who's heard. I printed out before today's meeting 2 letters from the city of Troutdale and a letter from the city of Wood Village, really stating their frustration, their barriers, their challenges in dealing with the joint office, the structure that we're talking about here today. What I would like to see is, as we talk about regional standards and goals for the region, is what's the approach with our jurisdictional partners within the counties? Because we get these plans from the counties, but those plans should be made up from those smaller jurisdictions. But in this case, Multnomah County is not listening to our smaller cities. And that is evident today. And I'm also going to submit these into the record for public testimony so that it is on the record for us. But questions I do have is, how do we make it easier for people to access these services? How do we make it easier for people to understand what services are available to them and themselves and the people that they care about? Because you did mention something, and I think it's lost in a lot of these conversations, because we all are housed, we all are clothed, we all are fed, we all are warm or cool. But the lens of the people who are actually on the streets. And I think that is the most important piece. I think that's the North Star. These folks are our North Star, because we talk about lifting boats. Well, these people don't have a boat. And we can't really lift their boat with our tide if they don't have a boat. And so we're talking about really, how do we build this plane, fly it, put upgrades on it, change out the pilot, fuel it, all while we're still in the air. That's where we are. Right. That's where we are. And so those are the things I want to talk about, or want to bring up here, but also really listen to our jurisdictions, right? Like, really listen to our jurisdictions, because I don't think the city of Portland gets, when they do a sweep, people filter eastward and they start at 82nd and then move to 102nd, and then they move to 122nd. And then oftentimes they end up out in the Sandy Delta or in Thousand Acre. And that's the kind of problems that we have in East County, is because in this letter from Troutdale and from Wood Village, they state that they've been requesting funds to, which makes no sense, support the HOPE team, which is a Multnomah County service, in going out and navigating and reaching out to people in those wooded areas, and they have met no success. And so when I hear that, I see that, I'm like, well, there's some clear dysfunction happening. And when you're not listening to a jurisdiction that has elected officials, a mayor, a city council, a body, and you minimize their needs, their wants, and their asks, that's not leadership.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Wong.
Yes, thank you, Madam President, and also by thanking you for your leadership and spending your last couple of weekends diving deep into this. That's been a lot of difficult work and conversations. But yeah, overall, I think we're headed in the right direction, in terms of revamping our governance structure. I'd really like to think about how we could expand opportunities for various stakeholders to, join the effort. And I feel like what I've been hearing out in the community is, there's folks that are in the club and then folks that aren't in the club. So I hear that from, service providers that, are doing really important work, but unable to access resources to expand their impact. I also hear it from local jurisdictions that are also doing, yeoman's work, and often struggling to figure out how to pay for that as well. So how do we kind of build that broader tent so that more people can be engaged, I think is really important. And then just having a really clear role for especially providers and frontline staff to have a say. And I think there's often a disconnect between like what folks are experiencing in their day-to-day work and what happens up at the policy level. So being able to bridge that gap will be really important. And also, I don't want to lose any momentum that we've actually been able to build over the last couple months and years. So if we do transition over to a new governance model, how do we kind of keep some of the findings and energy and recommendations that came from a Tri-County Planning Committee or other bodies, and how do we incorporate that so we're not back to square one and having to start over. And I think just overall we need a place to be able to deliberate on how we address the challenge holistically. And I don't want us to get into these like pitched battles between like jurisdictions, or also, in the continuum of care, like between service providers and housing developers. They're all part of the solution, and I think there's just needs a place where we can kind of hash that out. Like at the end of the day, when folks are experiencing houselessness, they actually just at the end of the day need a place to live, and we're not going to be able to just service our way out of this issue. So how do we have that conversation where we're talking about all ends of the spectrum and really allocate resources in that prospective way? But I think overall, this is a really important conversation and sets the stage for the next body of work that we're entering.
Thank you. I think all that helps. Melissa, if you have any questions from the council, please weigh in of things that you want to hear more about. I guess the North Star conversation, stepping back, we can only get change if every partner is going to come to the table and want change. And that includes the counties, it includes the cities, it includes all the providers. We have to be open to change. And I think what we can do is set a new foundation, but it requires everybody to come to that, right? With the ability to say, yeah, we need to look at how we do this differently. And so when I think about the North Star and going back to expectations, I really do think that we need to have two really big, very difficult conversations coming up with a lot of folks in the room, folks who have not been there, and define what expectations are of each of these different groups. From what should you experience if you're homeless and unsheltered? And not just, the terminology, what is it, rare, brief, and non-recurring? I don't have a definition for any of those terms yet, and I don't know what success looks like, rare, brief, and non-recurring. We got to do a little bit deeper work on what that means. Does that mean that you are automatically co-enrolled in all programs, no matter how you enter the system? Should we expect that? Should somebody that is homeless, as Councilor Simpson pointed out, should you expect that when you enter into the system, no matter the form of money, no matter what, you are co-enrolled, so that no matter what your needs are, you're accelerated into help? Shouldn't that be an expectation? And then what does that mean? Does that mean that when you're in shelter, you're not there more than 3 or 6 months? What are our expectations? If you're there longer than that, what does that mean? And then if you then move on to permanent supportive housing, what other supportive mechanisms should be there immediately for you? So I don't think we've defined these things of like, what are we trying to hit very well. We are able to point to a lot of people being kept out of homelessness by prevention, which is great. And we have been able to move a lot of folks out of homelessness. And we know how many beds, we know how many permanent supportive housing units we have, but we don't know if we've achieved success, and we don't know how to define that for individuals. So I think we're all rolling around, and what are the expectations that we should all have? If you're a city, should you expect that as part of the system, that your needs will also be looked at and prioritized? If you're, the counties, what are the expectations? So I feel like we need to delve into that conversation. That's the first one. The second one is on the other end of the spectrum, and I think it's a systems mapping conversation with everybody from city electeds all the way down to outreach folks on the ground, helping map out what the system looks like and really diving into what actual knobs we have to turn up or down to get better outcomes. And that's not going to happen until everybody's in a room really getting their perspectives on the table, because they're all valid. All these perspectives are valid, and they make up all the puzzle pieces of a bigger system that we've got a very narrow lens on right now. And we need to broaden that lens in order to achieve better outcomes. So I think those are the two biggest conversations, but we do need to set a table to have those conversations. So Counselor Rosenthal and then Counselor Nolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to put words into Counselor Simpson's mouth, but I think what I got from what he was saying, and I think it's important too, is our expectations are one thing, the expectations of the various, cities and counties and so forth. But what we don't have a good handle on are what are the expectations of the people who are homeless? And we don't have a good way to get that. It's not an easy thing to get because there's going to be different expectations. The expectations of people who are in danger of becoming homeless and the people who are actually been homeless for a short period and people who have been homeless for a long period. And I think that that's one of the things that has to be gotten in the system. So these people are heard.
Counselor Nolan.
Thanks. I thought we were going around a second time, so some
go
of
ahead.
these are from the previous round. But to the North Star idea, I think given that this region has, as you pointed out, the largest per capita resource available to address this problem, we need to be bold in our statement of outcome that people can expect. And the individual pieces should be worked out through management and programs and intergovernmental agreements. But from our point of view, I think we ought to say like and mean it that we aim to end or achieve functional zero on homelessness by 2034. That's 10 years from now. And as a midpoint or a milestone along the way, we want to reduce rough living to below, pick a number, 1,500 by 2030. And then build a system of who's responsible for what and who should expect what based on something that everyone can understand. Because doing better or reducing homelessness is not an objective standard. And if we want people to understand and buy into that goal, it has to be clear. Mm-hmm. I do also want to really be clear when we talk about how we set up to achieve this and who sits at a table to evaluate what is useful, what's efficient, what's successful. We have to expressly include not just the cities, but the city of Portland with 680,000 residents. It is home to more than the population, more than the next 6, maybe 8 largest cities in the region. And if we treat it like just another city, I don't see how we can succeed in an effort where Portland needs to succeed for our region to succeed, and our region needs to succeed for Portland to succeed. And it's not just the proportion of people living here, but it's also the proportion of the homeless neighbors of ours who live in the city of Portland. It needs to be expressly and actively engaged.
Yeah, I know.
It's just another thought on that. We also have a unique and critical opportunity here because the city will have a completely new set of elected officials. There is only the possibility of one veteran. And this is with the new structure, the new people in the seats at the City of Council, this is the time for us to really reach out and engage them in a respectful, mutual way.
Yeah, let me just remind you of what we have region-wide with the cities. I think Councilor Wong just had a conversation with the city of Portland as well. I don't know if they're talking to everybody. They're in the tens of millions of dollars of need. Our next rung is the amount of money that's going from the counties to their cities in each county outside of the city of Portland. And Multnomah County has put out $300,000 for the small cities. And they are to apply for that. Washington County has $200,000 going to 3 cities for a shared homeless navigator, I guess, coordinator between the 3 cities. And Clackamas County has $7 million going out the door to the cities for different needs that they have. So the issue is now about, we don't have a system set up that is equitable for all of the needs within all of the cities. Some are getting maybe what they need. Maybe they could use more in Clackamas, but the other 2 outside of the city of Portland are struggling to figure that out. And I think as we move forward, whatever we take to the ballot is going to have to be more clear about what is included in the ability to fund for cities to be able to actually be able to get some help in dealing with this on the ground. Because it's not clear that some of the things that they want covered could be covered by the SHS measure. So I'll just end that there. And did you have something? Okay, Melissa, did you have some pointed questions to help us along?
Well, first, I just want to really appreciate the conversation and just the reflections, and it's especially valuable, I think, for me and my team to hear kind of what you're hearing in the community. I would love to just hear a little bit more on this theme of clarity and expectations. I completely agree. I think when you hear the criticisms of this program, so much of it can be traced to ambiguous or unclear roles, ambiguous or unclear expectations, and then those conflicts happen because people don't understand, well, why is this happening over here, but it's not happening over there. So would love to just hear more from council about how a governance structure might begin to address that. Any thoughts that you have for how we would start to nibble at that elephant?
Because we have the zoo, I just started laughing.
Yes,
Sorry. Well, Councilor Simpson, did you have something you wanted to add on that, or?
I just want to add on to that last piece. Thank you for sharing the small city allocations. But again, go back to this letter, that $300,000 that the East County said, it's not, it's a third of what they asked for. They asked for $1 million to address the work and not to be handheld to do the work.
So, I mean, to me, it would be a conversation with the different stakeholders and probably a draft proposal of what the expectations should be, could be, starting with those on the ground, unsheltered and sheltered homeless. Like, what should you expect if you're if you're somebody who's in need? How long should we? What are timelines? What services should you be able to access easily so that you're actually standardizing across the region? I don't know why I'm so live. Emphasis, exclamation point, heart emoji. Okay. I think we need to do that exercise. I think we need to get input on that exercise, even if it's all right, thank you. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing, in order to bring everybody around the table, like I said, I do think we need an actual systems, a facilitated conversation with a huge number of stakeholders in the convention hall that's actually in real time, like mapping out the system and getting input on it. What feeds into what, but also what impacts each other. If you move this dial too far, we're not getting what we need, right? If you accelerate this, it's not actually helping, but if you move the dial over here, is actually accelerating. And I think we need all of those perspectives put together to get at the, how do you achieve those expectations then? If we lay out the expectations, then the systems mapping would be able to help point us in the direction of what the priorities should be, because right now there is some prioritization going on, but it's not clear why that prioritization is going on and whether it leads to the outcomes that we all agree on. And so I think these two things have become, in my mind, the only way to go forward, because right now we don't have alignment on either one of those things. What we expect and how the system will work to make those expectations play out on the ground. Councilor Rosenthal?
Yeah, but I have one other thought, and I'm just to offer this as consideration, particularly since the comment was that we have a city that's going to be undergoing a rather dramatic systemic change, and we don't exactly know how it's going to work out. There's going to be very few repeat people there that have a lot of experience, some, but not that many. The question is, I think there's two phases. The first phase is, what kind of expectations do we have for a governance structure, or what sort of ideal governance structure we want to create, and then what are we going to do in between now and when that governance structure is actually operational. In other words, if we define a governance structure right now, whatever the committee structure is, the committees that lead up to it, the size and the stakeholders, before it actually becomes functional and able to really sort of run things and create the North Star, we're going to have a process. And how is the authorities going to be distributed? Is it just going to be, Metro as it currently is, or are we going to make some transition? Are we going to modify the current tri-county advisory body in the interim, et cetera, et cetera? So I think we have to have both a transition period as well as a sort of a long-term goal on this. And that's just my thinking.
President Peterson? I wonder if I could just back up the conversation quickly just for a foundational piece, and that is to I think slide 3 or 4, Georgia, where we had kind of the big buckets of the problem that we're trying to solve with governance, and the feedback that we need clear outcomes and a regional vision, better experiences for providers and community, clear roles and ability to change when needed, and more efficient decision-making and spending. Is there clarity or agreement on the council that these are the issues that we would like to solve through a changed governance program? I think we've heard a couple other things as well, but just checking for that alignment with what we heard from our stakeholders as potentially a way to then kind of ground the conversation going forward.
So I guess I would just weigh in and say, I don't see prioritization
Okay.
across the region.
Yep.
Of how, we have clear roles and responsibilities, clear outcomes and a regional vision, but we don't have any, instead of efficient decision-making, it's fine to say efficient, but it's the prioritization.
Thank you.
There will never be enough money to do everything. The question is how do we get the most bang for our buck for the most number of people? And I don't think we are in that mode, because we're still dealing in a scarcity mode. Even though there's more money flowing through the system, it's still being dealt with as though it's a scarcity mode. And because there's a 10-year deadline, there's no clear goal line of what does it mean at the end of 10 years. Because I still believe that the wording that we're using around homelessness isn't specific enough to actually say what we're trying to accomplish. So, Councilor Wong.
Thank you, Madam President. Just kind of addressing your point in what we'd like to see more in governance. I think I'd really, maybe this is part of the North Star, but I'd really like to know, where does the buck stop, right? I think the system that we have now is just really decentralized, blame is assigned and praise, kind of somewhat arbitrarily. So there isn't a single entity that is like, you know, they're calling the shots. This is who we hold accountable. So accountability is kind of dispersed. And I think what we would like to see, I would like to see, is just some more tools at Metro, because, you know, this is the Metro supportive housing measure. And for all intents and purposes, we'd like to stop here at this council. Like, we're the ones that referred it to voters, but I don't feel like we have the requisite like tools and areas of input to meaningfully change any directions. So, you know, like President Peterson was saying, we take a really retrospective look. So plans come to us for approval, and then if things aren't on track, then we have the corrective action plan tool. But, you know, I think I'd like to see council just take more of an ownership role, because ultimately, you know, we do have a lot of accountability to the public on, you know, their tax dollars and the outcomes that we want to see. So I think, you know, like what is the hard power or soft power that we could exercise to really kind of shape the direction in a way that it feels right to hold us accountable.
I think the other piece that's missing, just because this is focused on the SHS, is the inflow. And trying to also acknowledge that the only way to help with the outflow is to reduce the inflow. Counselors?
I'll just reflect that, you know, when the inflow is so massive, and I think I've seen this in, you know, in other fields, other experiences, it can become very easy to just feel like, it doesn't matter because the need is so huge. We can throw the resources anywhere and it will do some good. And I think we have suffered a little bit from that in this program, just because of the speed and wanting to get spending out. But I completely agree on the prioritization that it's not a limitless resource. There is an almost limitless need, but that should drive us to be even more specific and clear about who is prioritized in the system, who would benefit most from the investments that we're making. And then, you know, how do we make that decision? What inputs, what people at the table? And where does the buck stop? Where does that final decision get made? That this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. And I guess I think we should also just talk about the fact that we have intergovernmental agreements with our county partners as they stand now, with very specific ways in which we do business. So anything that we talk about here would be in conflict with an existing IGA. And so there's things that we can, again, we can make progress talking with our partners on very specific things, but at some point, after a lot of reflection, and I think that's what we're going through right now, is a lot of reflection, we need to move forward, and we need to have conversations about what's in a ballot measure, as well as how do we need to look at changing the flow of information and the governance structure within the IGAs, which is not going to be an easy conversation. But I think this is why I'm trying to push this forward, is that we need all parties at the table very open to thinking about how to do things differently to be more effective once we can get agreement on what expectations we're trying to meet. Some sort of prioritization. So, Councilor Simpson?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to chime in on this and say I agree with what Councilor Wong says and about where the buck stops, but more importantly, like, what is oversight without some enforcement mechanism? I know we have IGAs and things like that, but like, what's enforcement without teeth? Like, we don't have any teeth to really enforce anything. And so, like, when I think about that, and I know we have IGAs and it's a delicate balance that we have to have, but in any other realm, we are the funder. If this was philanthropy, these groups, no matter what they were, would have to come and report back to us. I get that. However, we are still the funder. The buck stops with us. people are gonna look at us and say, hey, Metro had oversight over that. Why didn't they do X, Y, and Z? We have to have some teeth moving forward.
Yeah, and just having thought about this, the words compliance and non-compliance are important in this conversation. We have not, as a region, again, because we have not set up expectations of what we are trying to achieve that are crystal clear. I don't know what compliance looks like,
Well, we gotta get there.
right? And therefore, I don't know what non-compliance looks like.
I think non-compliance is the money sitting in an account and people still on the street.
And again, right, we're walking this tightrope of we need to get the money out the door, but we want to make sure that it's spent in the most effective way. And so the more pressure we put on the counties to put the money out the door, the more it's spread like peanut butter. And are we actually achieving anything? So yeah, so I think the question is how do we define what success looks like? And that takes more than just the Metro Council weighing in.
Yeah, and I'll reflect that, you know, over and over again in our conversations, this concept of doing more of that expectation setting up front, well in advance. Everybody being clear on what's, you know, what we aim to accomplish, how we're going to accomplish that, how much money it's going to cost, and then really tracking that carefully as it happens. That upfront is missing from the current system.
Mm-hmm.
And we're back casting. So I think when we think about compliance, non-compliance, teeth, no teeth, a critical part of that is how do you judge when you need to exercise that?
Right.
You have to have enough data and information to know that, you know, what the expectation is, if it's being met or not met, whether we're talking about outcome spending or anything.
For instance, let's just take a business, whether it's in Beaverton or downtown Portland, doesn't really matter. What should your expectations be once you make the call to say there's somebody sleeping in my doorway? What would your expectations be? What is practical? What is reasonable? And that gets to what a city program would look like, because they have the public safety officers, right? They have the people who are going to be first contact, get to a caseworker. What does that look like? I don't think we've been clear, and I don't think we've said we heard everybody's perspective from all the way around this issue to say, we hear you, we recognize you, and here's what you should expect. And silence. Okay. I don't know if did you want to weigh in? Oh, I thought you went to reach for the hand raised. Any other specific questions? It sounds to me like we should be coming back to you with a more specific proposal on a committee, which lays a foundation, but more specifics on how to get at these two other big issues that are out there. What does success look like, and how do we work together system-wide to have the conversation of how do you get to priorities to be able to meet those expectations? And then we can talk about what does that look like in terms of even a ballot measure. So we have a very short timeline if we are actually trying to get a ballot measure out by May of next year. I just want to put that in front of you. But I think it would be well worth the time and well worth the energy to bring a lot of folks together into these rooms to really define these things. So, Councilor Nolan.
Thank you.
Councilor Nolan, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I misheard.
Sorry, we're all friends here. I think we need to really wrestle with among ourselves, and as appropriate, as timely with our partners, about the question of what do we want to ask the voters to help us achieve by changing the revenue stream. Then talk about what governance, and beyond that, what specific programs will help us get there. Figuring out the governance before we figure out which seems out of order. You know, if I want to build an apartment building, I want to define what it is before I figure out who will build it for me. Knowing what we want to accomplish. And yes, that will be hard. We've talked a bit about how this wasn't ever going to be easy. If we're really crisp about it, really succinct about what outcomes we need, that will almost necessarily mean that some advocates, some players won't get everything they want out of this. And it would be a fabulous framing for us to put the energy into that. And it would also be a fabulous stress test on our capacity as a council and as a region to deal with differences and come out with our eyes really focused on a North Star.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's no right order of things here because I think we need to be in a learning environment and you have to start defining some things to come back and redefine them, right? So I think as long as we're moving forward and we're narrowing the variables and narrowing things as quickly as possible, I think we're making progress. And I think we're making forward momentum, but the ability to come back and revisit some initial assumptions, I think is really important. So I think you're on to something. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question actually for you because you've had more opportunities to discuss this issue with a lot more people. You know, I know what my assumption is, but my assumption is that everybody is in concurrence. Maybe that's not true, that supportive services and housing are inseparable. You can't do one without the other. So I'm just curious if the business leaders and community leaders that you've talked to, whether you hear any dissension. In other words, that would seem to be an element of the North Star, that these are inseparable projects and they have to move hand in hand in some way. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's an emergency in front of us, and then there's the long term, and both have to be held together. And I think that there's just a question of how much emphasis do you place on the emergency versus the long term, because building housing is not a short term discussion; it's a long term discussion. So I think everybody agrees that we need more housing in this region, and more housing that is from middle income down. We are sorely behind in production on that. That conversation has to happen simultaneously while we're dealing with the emergency. And so I think everybody recognizes that, but getting people to prioritize that, there is no agreement, I don't think, on, which is why we're circling right now, is that there isn't agreement on the priority for the SHS money and how to spend our time as a region dealing with the production of housing. I don't think there's agreement on how to get to that. But if you're talking about a ballot measure that would include affordable housing, I think most folks say yes, as long as we prioritize SHS services, which was the original intent.
Okay.
That's a generic comment. Not everybody's going to completely agree to that comment, but the majority, I think, would say, yeah.
Do you think there's clarity and universal acceptance of what prioritizing means?
Mm-mm.
Does that mean we spend 90% of what's collected on what was the original SHS program on SHS type investments? Or do we only, is the threshold 80%? Is the threshold 51%? Those are things we probably ought to really scratch at.
Yep, and I think there's
So
a lot
that
of work.
people don't go into advocating for something having Some people advocating for it, yes, because we're gonna get another $100 million worth of bondable construction money. Or some people say yes, because we'll still be spending 95% on supportive housing services. That will be one of our first hard tests.
I can share from the stakeholder advisory table that there was, while we didn't see consensus, there was consensus on the belief that no matter what, these dollars should be focused on the original populations, on the people. And that those people needed services and eventually permanent supportive housing. So I don't know if that helps, but while the topic of like, excuse me, affordable homeownership and, you know, other types of housing did come up, there was the most alignment around staying focused on the original, on the people who the measure was originally meant to serve.
And I don't want to delve into the financial side yet, because this is a governance conversation and we really truly need to like get some of these ideas out on the table. But I think there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes of what scenarios are within the realm of getting agreement. Where you're still prioritizing the SHS, but allowing for a city program, allowing for an affordable housing program. How do you get there? And that means prioritizing some things. So.
It would be wonderful if we could share some of those conversations.
Yeah.
So that those of us who aren't attending them are aware of them, can filter that information in with our responsibility to our constituents.
Yep. So I think the next conversation that we have scheduled is more specific on a governance structure. And I think we can start to talk about some of the financial layouts coming up. Layouts, that's not a really good word. Financial scenarios. All right. Everybody gotten on the table what they need to get on the table for now? I'm always available, always looking for suggestions, edits, knocks on the head. All right. I've taken quite a few. I can take some more. All right. Anybody else? Okay. We will move on then to Chief Operating Officer Communication. Thank you, Adisa, for helping with the conversation.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. This is an important topic. So just wanted to first say thanks again to those who went to Thursday's Metro Mixer at Wood Village. It was just lovely to be there in community and, you know, check in with the folks out there who are our partners day to day. And then I also wanted to mention and give a shout out to and thank you to Senator Merkley for visiting our WPEZ Metro Central Transfer Station with Councilor Lewis last week. The senator visited the organics bay and was interested in learning more about batteries, and WPEZ leadership took the opportunity to express their appreciation for the proposed federal budget note to help fund a food waste depackager. So it's always fun to show off what we're doing, and I really appreciate Senator Merkley's just taking the time out.
Thank you. Awesome. Councilors, anything to share today? Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, I think I need to report on the RDPO meeting of last Friday. This is sort of a bad news, good news sort of thing. The bad news is that all of our election departments of Clackamas County, Multnomah County, Washington County are under some threat. Individual workers are under threat. Secretaries are under threat. This is, I have to say, probably the first time I've been worried, not about casting my vote, but about having it counted correctly. Clackamas County is putting up fencing, has bulletproof glass. Washington County is having to put special films on their windows so that in case of emergency, the whole election counting and the whole election reporting and the whole basically certification process is under threat, and I think we know that. The good news is that these counties, and there were reports from the counties of Clackamas, Clark, Washington, Multnomah, and also Columbia, is that most of these agencies are very proactive in taking a lot of steps to prevent any sort of mayhem that might occur, or any both threats, both cyber as well as direct threats. They're all taking account of potential active shooter issues and so forth. But I just have to say, in the old days, I remember I cast my ballot and I assumed everything was going to work. We're in a different situation.
Okay. That's scary. And I'm glad they're thinking ahead though.
They are.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I got one.
Yeah.
Yesterday was the travel Portland board meeting. As you know, Jeff Miller is not going to be the executive director there any longer. So they had opportunity to say their goodbyes to him. I believe this will be his last one. And this morning, GPI had a sports summit over at Avenue across the street. We got to hear from Fred Rivera, GM of the Seattle Mariners, and how sports and civic life come together. And I really love that Fred talked about how transportation and sports come together.
Several times.
Several times. It was sports and safety. And so that was really good to hear. And I hope that, I really feel like the crowd that was in the room was the choir, but the folks we need to really get in there are our legislators, so they can really understand the importance of sports tourism for our state and our region.
Agreed. Thank you. Anybody else? All right, with that, we are adjourned. Council work session. Our next regular scheduled meeting is Thursday, September 26th at 10:30 a.m. Thank you all for the conversation and the continued work on this topic.
Speaking of transportation, are you going to attend that Happy Valley transportation